Silence taught me everything I needed to know about survival in the Wexley household. While my sister Celestine basked in adoration, I became a ghost in my own home, watching, listening, collecting fragments of truth my family desperately tried to bury. The night they locked me in the attic during her engagement party, they thought they'd finally erased me completely. Instead, they handed me the key to their destruction, time alone with our family's darkest secrets. When I emerged from that dusty prison, I wasn't just Coraline anymore. I was a reckoning they never saw coming. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. They made me feel like a guest in my own bloodline. I grew up understanding that silence was the Wexley family's most prized possession. More valuable than the antique silverware my mother polished every Sunday, more precious than my father's collection of rare first editions that no one was allowed to touch. In our home, truth was messy, and the Wexleys despised mess above all else. My name is Coraline Wexley, second daughter, the afterthought, the one who doesn't photograph well. I learned to move through our sprawling Victorian home like a ghost. Not the vengeful kind, the forgotten kind. The kind whose footsteps make no sound on the marble floors, whose reflection barely registers in the ornate mirrors lining our hallways. I became exceptionally good at this particular magic trick: invisibility. This morning started like any other. I woke before dawn, when the house was still quiet enough that I could hear it breathe. These early hours were mine alone. By 7, my mother would emerge from her bedroom wearing her perfectly pressed silk robe, and the performance would begin again. I passed her closed office door, the sanctum I was forbidden to enter without express permission, and made my way downstairs. The scent of fresh coffee guided me to the kitchen, where I expected solitude. Instead, I found chaos. No, higher on the waist. Can't you see how it bunches? My sister Celestine stood on a small platform in the center of our kitchen, arms extended like a prima ballerina, while a harried-looking woman with pins between her lips adjusted the hem of a stunning ivory dress. "Morning," I murmured, slipping past them toward the coffee pot. Celestine's eyes flicked to me, then away. "You're up early." "I'm always up early." She didn't respond, too busy examining her reflection in the full-length mirror that had mysteriously appeared in our kitchen overnight. The dress was exquisite, layers of silk that caught the morning light and seemed to glow from within, just like Celestine herself. While I poured my coffee, 2 men in catering uniforms entered through the back door, carrying clipboard and sample menus. They nodded politely in my direction before approaching Celestine. "Miss Wexley, we have the final menu options for Saturday's event." Saturday's event? I stirred my coffee slowly, pretending not to listen. "Let's move to the dining room," Celestine suggested, carefully stepping down from her platform. "Mother will want to approve everything." As they filed out, I caught fragments of conversation: champagne selections, floral arrangements, place settings for 200 guests. Something significant was happening in my own home, and once again, I was the last to know. I followed at a distance, lingering in the hallway just outside the dining room. My mother's voice carried easily, crisp and commanding. "No, only Celestine. The other one, she doesn't photograph well." The other one, not even worthy of a name. I backed away from the doorway, coffee forgotten, and escaped to the only place I ever felt truly at peace: the garden. Behind our meticulously landscaped grounds was a small greenhouse, long abandoned, but still standing. Inside, the air was warm and earthy, the glass panels clouded with age. Here, I could breathe. As I settled onto the old wooden bench, something caught my eye: a corner of leather poking through the soil of an overturned pot. Curious, I dug it out and found myself holding a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. The inscription on the first page made my heart race: "Property of Romily Wexley." Aunt Romily, the family ghost. The sister no one mentioned. All I knew of her came from whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, from old photographs where her face had been carefully cut out. She had disappeared decades ago, and the silence around her name spoke volumes. I tucked the journal into the pocket of my cardigan just as the gardener approached the greenhouse. The secret felt warm against my side as I made my way back to the house. The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of activity that excluded me. Florists, decorators, and staff transformed our already immaculate home into something even more pristine and untouchable. By evening, I had pieced together the truth. Celestine was engaged, and a grand party was planned for Saturday to announce it to the world, or at least to the slice of Boston society that mattered to my parents. At dinner that night, Silas Rowan joined us. Tall, with carefully tousled dark hair and the easy confidence that comes from old money, he sat beside Celestine and across from me. Their engagement wasn't officially announced yet, but the massive diamond on my sister's left hand told the story plainly enough. "Coraline," Silas said, surprising me by using my name. "I hear you're quite the artist." I looked up from my barely touched salmon.
"Who told you that?"
His smile revealed perfect teeth. "I did my research on the Wexley family." "Coraline dabbles," my mother interjected, her voice dismissive. "Nothing serious." Celestine shot Silas a warning look I couldn't quite interpret. "Let's discuss the guest list, shall we?" But Silas kept his eyes on me. "I'd love to see your work sometime." "There's nothing to see," my father said, speaking for the first time that evening. Graham Wexley, once an idealistic lawyer, now a corporate attorney who defended companies that poisoned rivers and underpaid workers. He hadn't looked me in the eye in years. "Coraline will be helping with arrangements on Saturday." Behind the scenes. The message was clear. I wasn't a guest at this celebration. I was staff. Later that night, after everyone had retired to their rooms, I sat cross-legged on my bed and opened Romily's journal by the light of a small lamp. Her handwriting was fluid, almost frantic, filled with observations about the family that felt eerily familiar. She too had been the second daughter, the one who didn't quite fit the Wexley mold. The last entry was dated just days before her disappearance. "They will silence me, but my truth remains in these walls." With the journal clutched to my chest, I made my way to my mother's office. I knew she'd be asleep by now. Laureen Wexley required precisely 8 hours of beauty rest every night. The door was unlocked, unusual for her carefully guarded space. Inside, I searched for anything related to Romily, birth certificates, photographs, letters. Instead, I found a file with my name on it. Inside, documentation of a trust fund in my name, with withdrawal slips bearing what appeared to be my signature. But I'd never seen this account, never signed these papers. "What are you doing in here?" My mother's voice cut through the silence like a blade. I turned, papers still in my hand. "You forged my signature. You took money that was meant for me." She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "You ungrateful little sneak." It wasn't the first time she'd struck me, but it was the first time I didn't cower. "I know about Aunt Romily," I said, my cheek stinging. I found her journal. The color drained from my mother's face. "Give it to me."
"No."
"You have no idea what you're meddling with, Coraline." She snatched the file from my hands. "Go to bed. We'll discuss your punishment tomorrow." The next day passed in tense silence. I tried to access my grandmother's study, a room that had been unused for years according to my parents, only to find it padlocked. Another family's secret locked away. On the eve of the engagement party, as workers transformed our home into a showcase, my mother approached me with a stack of antique linens in her arms. "Take these to the attic," she instructed. "They need to be stored properly, away from the guests." "Can't it wait until after the party?" I asked, suspicion growing. "No," she said simply. "Do it now. You're in the way down here." I took the linens and climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, a space I rarely visited. The door was heavy, the hinges protesting as I pushed it open and stepped inside. The musty air filled my lungs as I heard a sound that turned my blood cold, the distinct click of a lock engaging. I dropped the linens and ran to the door, pounding until my fists hurt. "Let me out." "Mother." "Father." "Anyone." Only silence answered. Through the attic's tiny window, I watched as Celestine posed with Silas in the garden below. Photographers circled them like satellites, capturing their perfect smiles, their perfect love, their perfect lie. I was locked away, forgotten. But they had made a critical mistake. They had left me with time to think, with evidence of their deception, and with a growing rage that would fuel what came next. They didn't expect me to escape. They should have. They left me in the dust of forgotten things, not knowing that I am made of memory. The first hour in the attic was pure panic. I threw my body against the door until my shoulder throbbed, screamed until my voice broke, and clawed at the ancient wood until my fingernails split. No one came. No one heard. Or worse, they heard and chose to ignore me. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to stop. I slumped against the door, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on my face. Below me, through the floorboards, I could hear the faint sounds of celebration beginning, soft music, polite laughter, the gentle clink of champagne glasses. I caught my reflection in a cracked mirror propped against a stack of trunks, barefoot, my hair wild around my face, dressed in the simple cotton dress I'd chosen that morning, now smudged with decades of attic grime. I looked like a madwoman, like someone who didn't belong in the carefully curated world of the Wexleys. Good, I whispered to my reflection. They will remember me. The attic was larger than I remembered from my few childhood ventures up here. Forgotten furniture draped in yellowed sheets created a landscape of ghosts. Trunks and boxes lined the walls, each potentially holding pieces of family history deemed too messy for display. One trunk in particular caught my eye, newer than the others, its brass fittings still shining despite the dust. The lock was substantial, but the key hung on a nail just inches away, as if someone wanted it to be found, eventually. Inside, neatly organized, were dozens of letters bound with faded blue ribbon. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting immediately, the same elegant script that had labeled Christmas presents and birthday cards throughout my childhood. These letters were all addressed to one person, Romily. I settled onto the floor, the trunk beside me, and began to read. The correspondence spanned years, beginning with cheerful updates when Romily first left for college and gradually evolving into something more desperate. My grandmother pleading for Romily to come home, to reconcile with the family, to forget what she had seen. The final letter was dated just weeks before my grandmother's death. My dearest Romily, I cannot leave this world knowing what they did to you. The institution was Laureen's idea. She convinced your father that your episodes were dangerous. I should have stopped them. I should have protected you. The truth about her and Edward will come out. I've made sure of it. The papers are in my study. Find them when I'm gone. All my love, always. Edward. The name meant nothing to me, but clearly, he was central to Romily's story. Deeper in the trunk, beneath the letters, I found a small tape recorder, the kind journalists used decades ago. The cassette inside was labeled simply our final statement. I pressed play, holding my breath as the tape hissed and crackled to life. My name is Romily Wexley. The voice was soft but intense, with a familiar cadence that sent chills down my spine. If you're listening to this, I'm either dead or as good as. They're coming to take me away tomorrow. Laureen has convinced everyone I'm having another episode. They call it paranoia. I call it seeing clearly for the first time. She paused, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. I saw them together, my sister and my fiancé. Edward proposed to me on Sunday. By Wednesday, he was in her bed. When I confronted them, Laureen laughed. Actually laughed. She said, "Did you really think someone like him would choose someone like you if he had options? And the worst part? Our father knows. He knows, and he's letting it happen because Edward's family has connections he needs." Another pause, longer this time. They're going to put me somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can't embarrass them. But I've hidden evidence of what they've done. The real estate transfers, the diverted inheritance, all of it. It's in the walls of this house. Literally. This place was my prison, but it will also be my witness. The tape clicked off, leaving me in silence once more. I sat motionless, trying to absorb what I'd heard. My mother, young then, but already calculated in her cruelty, had stolen her sister's fiancé, then conspired to have her institutionalized when she objected. In the walls, I murmured, repeating Romily's words. I began examining the attic more carefully, running my hands along the wooden panels that formed the interior walls. Near the far corner, one panel sounded different when I knocked, hollow compared to the others. I pushed against it, and to my surprise, it swung inward, revealing a small alcove barely large enough for a person to sit in. Inside was a pillow, a battery-powered lamp, and more journals, Romily's sanctuary, her escape within her prison. The newest journal contained detailed records of conversations overheard through the heating vents, of documents glimpsed on her father's desk, of plans discussed when they thought no one was listening. Romily had been gathering evidence, building a case against her family from within these very walls. I brought the lamp back to the main attic space and continued exploring. In a forgotten box of holiday decorations, I found an antique hand mirror with a crack running through its center. Experimenting, I discovered that by angling it toward the tiny attic window, I could see reflections of what was happening in the grand ballroom below. The engagement party was in full swing. Celestine glowed in her ivory dress, moving from guest to guest with practiced charm. My parents stood together near the grand staircase, accepting congratulations as if they'd orchestrated the cosmos itself rather than merely a marriage. And Silas, handsome, enigmatic Silas, kept glancing toward the ceiling, toward the attic, as if he could sense me watching. As the evening progressed, the moment came for speeches. My father spoke first, his corporate voice perfected for the occasion, followed by Silas, who thanked the Wexleys for welcoming him into their house with open arms. But as he said those words, his eyes drifted upward again, and I could have sworn he was looking directly at me through the floorboards, through the ceiling, through the barriers they had placed between us. I returned to Romily's hidden alcove and found something I'd missed, a slim folder containing legal documents. Among them was evidence of a family trust fund that had been redirected to Celestine using forged signatures. My signatures, created years before I was old enough to legally sign anything. They had been stealing from me my entire life, preparing for the day when I might discover my own worth and demand what was rightfully mine. Night deepened outside the tiny attic window. The party continued below, but the energy had changed. More drinking, louder laughter, the veneer of perfection beginning to thin as the hours wore on. I knew this was my moment. Using broken furniture legs and the antique linens my mother had so conveniently provided, I constructed a makeshift rope and pulley system anchored to the heaviest trunk in the attic. The physics were simple. I'd learned them in the school science classes my parents barely acknowledged. My descent would be slow, methodical, deliberate. Not a frantic escape, but a calculated return. I changed clothes, finding an old white nightgown in one of the trunks. It had belonged to my grandmother, perhaps, or to Romily herself. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I would return to the party as a ghost from the family's past, wearing the garment of a woman they had tried to erase. I threw open the attic window and looked down at the garden below. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of my mother's prized roses. One way or another, I was about to change the Wexley family forever. With Romily's journal tucked securely against my chest, I began my descent. They thought I was gone. I wanted them to see me rise. The cool night air kissed my skin as I lowered myself down the side of our family home. My hands burned from the friction of the makeshift rope, but the pain felt clarifying, necessary. With each inch of descent, I shed another layer of the obedient, invisible Coraline I had been trained to be. My bare feet touched the damp grass, and for a moment, I simply stood there, breathing in freedom. Music and laughter spilled from the open French doors leading to our grand ballroom. Inside, 200 of Boston's elite were celebrating my sister's engagement, an event I hadn't even been told about until I overheard it being planned. I walked slowly toward the light, the white nightgown billowing around my ankles. I must have looked like an apparition, hair wild from my attic confinement, face smudged with dust, eyes bright with purpose. I clutched Romily's journal in one hand, my lifeline to truth. No one noticed me at first. I slipped through the doorway and stood at the edge of the crowd, observing. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the room. Ice sculptures dripped slowly onto silver trays. Celestine stood at the center of it all, radiant in her ivory dress, Silas's hand possessively at the small of her back. Then, like a ripple in still water, awareness of my presence spread. A woman in sapphire blue turned, champagne flute halfway to her lips, and froze. Her gaze triggered another, then another, until a pocket of silence opened around me. "Who is that?" someone whispered too loudly. "Isn't that her sister?" came the response. "Why is she here like this?" The silence spread until it reached my mother. Laureen Wexley turned, her society smile still fixed in place, until she saw me. The transformation was immediate. Her face hardened, eyes narrowing to slits, mouth thinning to a bloodless line. She crossed the room with remarkable speed for a woman in 4-inch heels. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, grabbing my elbow and digging her manicured nails into my skin. "You're ruining everything." I looked at her hand on my arm, then directly into her eyes. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm finally in the photo." I pulled away from her grasp and moved deeper into the room. The crowd parted before me like the Red Sea, a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity on their carefully arranged faces. My father stood near the bar, his expression a study in contained fury. He made no move to intervene. Graham Wexley had perfected the art of strategic absence. Celestine saw me next. The blood drained from her face, so quickly I thought she might faint. She whispered something urgent to Silas, who turned to look at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher.
Not shock, exactly.
Something closer to recognition. I moved to the elaborate gift table and placed Romily's journal among the wrapped presents, having first tied it with a length of gold ribbon I'd found in the attic. My offering to the happy couple. As I stepped away from the table, Silas appeared at my side. Celestine was several feet behind him, clearly trying to catch up, but blocked by well-wishers. "I thought you'd never come back to this place," he said softly, his voice meant only for me. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, searching his face for the meaning behind his impossible statement. "What are you talking about? We've never met before this week." His eyes, deep blue, almost navy in the dimmed lighting, held mine. "5 years ago. The gallery opening in New York. You wore a green dress that matched your eyes." Memory crashed over me, a weekend escape I'd taken while my parents thought I was on a school trip. An art gallery in Soho. A handsome stranger who'd talked to me about Caravaggio's use of light and shadow for hours. We'd walked along the Hudson until dawn, and when he kissed me goodbye, he'd promised to find me again. "That was you," I whispered. "It's always been you, Coraline." His voice carried a weight of regret that made my heart ache. "But then I learned who you were, who your family was. And you chose Celestine instead." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected him, stepping back. "And so did I." Celestine finally reached us, her smile brittle as she looped her arm through Silas's. "Darling, the Petersons want to congratulate us." She didn't acknowledge my presence at all, as if by ignoring me, she could make me disappear. But I was done being invisible. I moved to the center of the room, deliberately positioning myself beneath the massive crystal chandelier, the focal point where the string quartet had played earlier. The musicians had taken a break, leaving a perfect void for my voice to fill. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'd like to propose a toast." The room stilled. All eyes turned to me, the wild-haired girl in a nightgown, bare feet on Italian marble, daring to speak. "To the Wexley family legacy," I continued, raising an imaginary glass, "built on silenced voices and stolen futures." My mother started toward me, but my father caught her arm, his expression calculating. He was assessing the damage control needed, weighing options. Always the lawyer. "Many of you knew my grandmother," I said, addressing the crowd. "Some of you might even remember she had 2 daughters, Laureen and Romily." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Older guests exchanged glances. "Romily disappeared decades ago," The family story was that she had a nervous breakdown, that she was unstable, dangerous even. But I found her journal. I gestured to the gift table. And, do you know what really happened? She discovered her sister, my mother, having an affair with her fiancé. When she confronted them, they had her committed to an institution. They erased her. Just like they tried to erase me tonight by locking me in the attic during this party. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. A photographer, hired to document the perfect engagement, raised his camera and captured the moment. My mother's horror. My father's cold calculation. Celestine's fury. Silas's unreadable expression. And me, finally seen. I will not disappear, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Not like her. The flash of cameras punctuated my words, not just the official photographer now, but guests with phones, capturing the unraveling of the Wexley facade. Behind me hung a massive portrait of my grandmother, her eyes seeming to follow me, with something like approval. My mother finally broke free of my father's restraint and rushed toward me, her face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little. Careful, mother, I interrupted. They're recording. She stopped short, suddenly aware of the phones pointed in our direction. What do you want? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. The truth, I replied simply. All of it. Starting with what happened to Aunt Romily after you had her committed. You have no idea what you're doing, she hissed. The damage you're causing. The damage was already done, I said. I'm just bringing it into the light. As if on cue, someone dimmed the overhead lights, and the quartet returned to their position. The party was attempting to reset, to continue despite the scene I'd caused. But it was too late. The perfect image was fractured. Phones were already buzzing with messages, social media notifications pinging as the story of the attic girl began to spread. I walked toward the exit, head high, aware of every eye following my movement. As I passed Silas, he reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You could have saved me, I whispered. Instead, you joined them. Outside, in the cool night air, I took my first deep breath as a woman with power. The Wexley empire of secrets had begun to crumble, and from its ruins, I would build something true. They had locked me away because they feared what I might become. They were right to be afraid. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about truth. And truth changes everything. The morning after the engagement party, I woke in my childhood bedroom for what I knew would be the last time. The house was unnervingly quiet, no staff bustling about, no delivery trucks in the driveway, none of the usual sounds of Wexley perfection being maintained. Just silence and the weight of unspoken words. I packed a single bag, clothes, toiletries, my sketchbooks, and the evidence I'd gathered from the attic. As I zipped the bag closed, there was a soft knock on my door. It's open, I called, expecting my mother's fury or my father's cold dismissal. Instead, Silas stepped into the room, looking rumpled and exhausted. His tailored shirt was creased, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it all night. You're leaving, he said, nodding at my bag. Did Celestine send you to stop me? He shook his head. She doesn't know I'm here. No one does. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of my bed, uninvited. That night in New York, I never forgot it. Don't, I said sharply. Whatever we had died the moment you chose my sister. I didn't know she was your sister when we met, he insisted. When I figured it out later, I thought maybe it was fate, a way back to you. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Through an engagement to Celestine? That's quite the detour. I was a coward, he admitted. I saw what your family had, what they could offer. And once I was in, I thought I could help you somehow from the inside. Help me. I shook my head in disbelief. I spent years invisible in this house while you played the perfect future son-in-law. That's not help, Silas. That's complicity. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Last night changed everything, he said. People are talking. The Wexley reputation. I don't care about the Wexley reputation. I cut him off. I care about what happened to Romily. I care about the truth. I shouldered my bag and moved toward the door. Goodbye, Silas. "Where will you go?" he called after me. I paused in the doorway. "To find what's mine." I had one more stop before leaving the house, my grandmother's study. In the chaos following my revelation at the party, I'd noticed the padlock was missing from the door. Either someone had removed it in haste, or they no longer saw the point in keeping it locked now that the secrets were spilling out. The study was a time capsule, untouched for years. Heavy velvet curtains shut out the morning light, and the air smelled of old books and forgotten perfume. I moved directly to the massive oak desk that dominated the room and began methodically searching the drawers. In the bottom drawer, behind a false panel I discovered by accident when my fingernails caught on a nearly invisible seam, I found a leather portfolio containing my grandmother's original will. The document was clear. Romily was to inherit half the estate, with the remainder split between my mother and any future grandchildren. My mother's name appeared nowhere as an executor or trustee. I tucked the will into my bag and continued searching. In a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard under the window seat, this family had a flair for melodramatic hiding places. I found more evidence. Bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from trust accounts in both Romily's and my names, property deeds with forged signatures, and most damning of all, correspondence with Meadowbrook Sanitarium regarding Romily's treatment. Armed with this evidence, I left the Wexley house without saying goodbye to my parents or Celestine. They didn't try to stop me. Perhaps they thought I would slink away in shame, that my outburst would be forgotten in a news cycle or two. They underestimated both me and the power of truth in an age of social media. I checked into a modest hotel downtown and spent the next 3 days making phone calls, scanning documents, and following the breadcrumb trail of Romily's life after her institutionalization. The pieces came together slowly, discharge papers from Meadowbrook leading to a halfway house in Vermont, which led to a change of name from Romily Wexley to Ruth Wilson, which finally led to a small care facility in Western Massachusetts. The facility was nothing like the imposing Victorian mansion I'd grown up in. Low, modern buildings nestled among pine trees, with wide windows letting in natural light. The receptionist eyed me warily when I asked to see Ruth Wilson. Clearly, they were protective of their residents.
I'm Harnis, I expectsläned.
I only recently learned she was alive. The woman's expression softened slightly. She doesn't get visitors. Ever. I know. That's part of why I'm here. After a few phone calls and a review of my identification, I was led down a quiet hallway to a small garden area. And there she was, Aunt Romily, now in her 60s, her hair a startling white against her pale skin. She sat in a wheelchair facing a bed of daisies, a sketchpad balanced on her lap. "Ruth," the aide said gently, "you have a visitor. Your niece, Coraline." Romily turned slowly, her movements deliberate. When her eyes met mine, I saw it, the same green as my own, the same shape. Family eyes. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by confusion, then caution. "You look like her," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "My mother." Around the eyes. "I brought something of yours," I said, approaching slowly. I held out her journal, the one I'd found in the garden greenhouse. Her hands trembled as she took it, fingers tracing the worn leather cover. "They told me I imagined things. Made up stories." She looked up at me. "Did you read it?" "Yes," I admitted. "It led me to you." The aide discreetly stepped away, giving us privacy while remaining within eyesight. "They'll hurt you if you make them look small," Romily warned, her voice suddenly urgent. "Laureen, she destroys what she can't control." "I know," I said, sitting beside her. "I've already started to fight back." Over the next 2 hours, I told her everything: the engagement party, my imprisonment in the attic, my escape and confrontation, the evidence I'd found. As I spoke, something in Romily's face changed. The clouded confusion in her eyes cleared, replaced by a sharp intelligence that decades of medication and isolation hadn't managed to extinguish. "The will," she said when I finished. "Mother changed it before she died. Laureen wouldn't have let that stand." "I found the original," I confirmed, "and records of what happened to your inheritance and mine." Romily's laugh was startling, bitter but alive. What will you do with it all? Expose them, I said simply. Make it right. When I left the care facility that evening, I had pages of notes, names, dates, account numbers, and most importantly, Romily's clear-eyed testimony about what had happened to her. She was not the rambling, delusional woman my family had described. She was lucid, articulate, and angry just as I was. The next morning, I contacted a journalist I'd found through careful research, Vanessa Taylor, known for investigative pieces on financial fraud and family dynasties. I sent her copies of the most damning documents and a brief outline of the story. Her response was immediate. Let's meet. Over coffee at a quiet cafe far from my family's usual haunts, I laid out the entire sordid history, the stolen inheritance, the institutionalization of a sane woman to silence her, the decades of fraud. Vanessa listened without interruption, recording our conversation with my permission. This isn't just a family scandal, she said when I finished. This is criminal activity. Financial fraud, identity theft, possibly false imprisonment. She tapped her pen against her notepad. Are you prepared for what happens when this goes public? Not just social embarrassment. We're talking potential criminal charges against your parents. I'm prepared, I said, and I meant it. The story broke 3 days later, not a small piece buried in the local section, but a front-page exposé with the headline, Wexley Family Empire Built on Fraud and Silenced Voices. Accompanying the article was a photograph of me standing outside the care facility with Romily, both of us staring directly into the camera, unflinching. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By mid-afternoon, my father's law firm had issued a statement distancing themselves from him. By evening, the board of directors for his primary corporate client had called an emergency meeting. Celestine's social media accounts went dark after her sponsorship deals with 3 luxury brands were publicly terminated. I received a call from Silas just before midnight. They're imploding, he said without preamble. Your father hasn't left to study in 2 days. Your mother is on some kind of medication that has her barely conscious. Celestine is threatening to leave the country. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I think you should know what you've accomplished, he said. And because I want to help if you'll let me. I have information about some of the financial dealings, things I noticed while I was getting close to your family. I considered his offer. Send what you have to Vanessa Taylor. She'll know what to do with it. And us, he asked softly. There is no us, Silas. There can't be. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, suddenly exhausted. This wasn't victory, not yet. It was just the beginning of a long process of truth-telling and rebuilding. The next morning, I received a certified letter containing a single key and an address in Cambridge. The accompanying note read, For Romily's grandniece. Use it well. It was signed by my grandmother's former attorney, a man I'd met only once at her funeral. The key opened the door to a small but elegant townhouse, filled with art and books, a secret refuge my grandmother had established in her final years. In the study, I found documentation of a separate trust fund she had created for me, one my parents had never discovered and couldn't touch. With financial security came the freedom to plan my next moves carefully. I contacted an attorney specializing in estate law and began the process of challenging the fraudulent distribution of my grandmother's assets. I commissioned a full audit of the Wexley family finances, revealing decades of systematic theft. And I began visiting Romily regularly, bringing art supplies, books, and gradually news of the outside world. With proper care and reduced medication, she improved rapidly, her mind clearing, her hands steady enough to hold a paintbrush again. During one visit, I brought the local newspaper. The headline read, Wexley estate to be auctioned following fraud allegations. Are you sad to see it go? Romily asked, studying my face. No, I said truthfully. That house was never a home. Just a beautiful prison for both of us. She took my hand, her skin papery against mine. They thought they could erase us, write us out of the family story. They failed, I said. 2 weeks later, I received a visitor at my Cambridge townhouse, my mother. Laureen Wexley looked nothing like the imperious woman who had ruled our household with icy precision. Her hair was dull, her makeup minimal, her clothes expensive but rumpled. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered, looking around at the art-filled space with something like recognition. "Mother's taste," she murmured. I should have known she'd find a way to circumvent us. "What do you want?" I asked, not offering her a seat. She met my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear there. "The board is voting tomorrow on whether to press charges. Your father's firm has already terminated his partnership. Celestine has lost everything, her sponsorships, her social standing, her engagement." Silas broke it off. "Of course he did," she said bitterly. "He knows which way the wind is blowing. Always has." I remained silent, waiting. "I tried to protect you," she said suddenly, "from the burden of being you."
I ser daher, incredulous.
Protect me? By locking me in the attic? By stealing what was rightfully mine? By making me feel invisible my entire life? "You don't understand what it means to be a Wexley woman," she said. "The expectations, the limitations, the constant scrutiny. I wanted something different for Celestine. And you were so much like Romily. Too sensitive, too observant, too unwilling to play the game. So you punish me for it," I said. "Just like you punished her." I did what I had to do. She stepped closer, her desperation palpable. "Call off the lawyers. Tell that reporter you were mistaken. We can fix this as a family." I shook my head. "We were never a family. Just actors in your perfect life production." "Please," she whispered. "I'm your mother." "No," I said quietly. "You're just the woman who gave birth to me. A mother would have loved me, protected me, seen me." She left without another word, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched from the window as she walked to her car, suddenly looking old and small in the afternoon light. The next day, I visited Romily again. She was sitting in the garden, sketching daisies, when I arrived. "I've been thinking," I said, settling beside her, "about what to do with the money when the estate is finally sorted." She looked up, interested. "I want to create a foundation," I continued, "for survivors of institutional abuse. People who've been silenced like you." She nodded slowly. A good use of Wexley money, finally. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the scratch of her pencil against paper. Then she set her sketchbook aside and turned to me. "I don't have much time left," she said matter-of-factly. "The doctors say my heart is failing. Too many years of those drugs they forced on me." "Romily." She squeezed my hand. "I'm not afraid, Coraline. I've been half dead for decades. These past few weeks with you have been more life than I've had in years." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I wish I'd found you sooner." "You found me exactly when you were meant to," she said. "When you were strong enough to finish what I started." 3 days later, Romily passed peacefully in her sleep. I was with her at the end, holding her hand as her breathing slowed and finally stopped. The nurses told me she hadn't been in pain, that it was a gentle death, the kind she deserved after such a difficult life. I arranged a small, private memorial service. None of the Wexleys attended, though I'd sent formal notifications. Only the care facility staff, Vanessa the journalist, and, surprisingly, Silas came to pay their respects. "I never met her," Silas said as we stood by her simple grave. "But I feel like I knew her through you." I didn't respond, my grief still too raw for conversation. After the service, I returned to the Wexley estate one last time. The auction was scheduled for the following week, but I had unfinished business there first. I climbed the familiar stairs to the attic, carrying a small gas can. The space looked different in daylight, smaller, less threatening. Just a dusty room full of forgotten things, not the chamber of horrors it had seemed the night I was locked inside. Methodically, I poured the gasoline over the trunks containing family photographs, over the furniture draped in yellowed sheets, over the floorboards where Romily had hidden her truth. I was careful. This wasn't about destroying the house, just cleansing this particular room of its darkness. I struck a match and watched as the flames caught and spread, consuming the physical evidence of generations of Wexley secrets. Then I walked downstairs and out the front door, calling the fire department as I left. They would arrive in time to save the house, but not the attic. That was exactly as I intended. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, signing the final paperwork to establish the Romily Foundation. The Wexley fortune, what remained of it after the legal battles and restitution, would fund safe houses and legal support for survivors of institutional abuse. As I walked out of the building, I caught my reflection in the glass doors, still recognizably myself, but changed. Stronger. More defined. I no longer moved like someone trying to disappear. I was not their failure. I was their reckoning. 6 months after the engagement party that changed everything, I stood in a small courtroom, my hands steady as I signed the paperwork. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, smiled as she stamped the document. "Congratulations, Ms. Rummel," she said. "Your name change is official. Coraline Rummel. No longer a Wexley." I had taken Romily's name, not her full surname, but a variation that honored her while still being uniquely mine. It felt right, like slipping into clothes that had been tailored specifically for me. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa waited, recorder in hand. Since breaking the Wexley story, her career had soared, and we'd developed a cautious friendship built on mutual respect. "How does it feel?" she asked as we walked to a nearby cafe. "Like freedom," I replied honestly. "Like I can finally breathe without carrying their name in my lungs." We settled at a corner table, and she placed a recorder between us. "Do you mind? People are still fascinated by your story." I nodded my permission. The initial media frenzy had died down, but public interest remained high, especially since the announcement of the Romily Foundation. "There's something else," Vanessa said, her expression turning serious. "Apex Publishing has approached me about your story. They want a book, the full account, from your perspective. I told them I wouldn't even mention it without speaking to you first." I stared into my coffee, considering the idea of exposing even more of my life to public scrutiny was daunting, but there was power in controlling the narrative. "I'll do it," I said finally. "But on one condition. I want to write it myself." Vanessa's eyebrows shot up. "You? Not a ghostwriter?" "I've been keeping journals since I was 12, I explained. "Writing is how I survived in that house. And I need to tell this story my way." She nodded slowly. "I'll arrange a meeting with the editors." 2 weeks later, I signed a contract for my memoir. The advance was substantial, enough to rent a small studio space where I could write and paint without distractions. I threw myself into the work, chronicling not just the dramatic events of the past year, but the quiet daily indignities that had shaped my life as the invisible Wexley daughter. As autumn turned to winter, I received an unexpected call from Celestine. We hadn't spoken since the night of the engagement party. "Can we meet?" she asked, her voice tight with what might have been nervousness. "Just to talk." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop far from our old neighborhood, neutral territory. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished perfection, the careful makeup, the designer clothes. This Celestine wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "You look different," I said as she slid into the booth across from me. "So do you," she replied. "Happier." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "I'm leaving Boston," she finally said. "Moving to Seattle. Fresh start." I nodded, unsurprised. "What about mother and father?" "Father's firm negotiated a settlement to avoid criminal charges. He's essentially retired now." "Mother?" She hesitated. "She's not well." The scandal broke something in her. I felt a twinge of something. Not quite regret, but acknowledgement of the human cost of truth. "Silas asks about you," Celestine continued, studying my face for a reaction. "He still loves you, you know." "He doesn't know me," I said firmly. "He loved an idea of me, a fantasy from one night years ago." "Maybe," she conceded, "but he never loved me. I knew that from the beginning." "Then why agree to marry him?" She smiled sadly. "The same reason I did everything else, to please mother and father. To be the perfect Wexley daughter." She reached across the table, not quite touching my hand. "I envied you, Coraline." Your courage to be different, to want more. You could have stood with me, I said. We could have faced them together. I wasn't strong enough. She straightened, composing herself. Anyway, I just wanted to see you before I left. To say,
I'm sorry.
for all of it. As she stood to leave, I called after her. Celestine, take care of yourself. She nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. You too, Coraline Romily. Spring brought the auction of the Wexley estate. I attended as an observer, watching as strangers bid on the physical trappings of my childhood. The house sold to a tech entrepreneur who planned to convert it into a wellness retreat. There was poetry in that transformation. With the legal battles settled and my memoir progressing, I turned my attention to the foundation. The first Romily house opened in June, a renovated Victorian in Cambridge, designed as a temporary home for women rebuilding their lives after institutional or family trauma. On opening day, I stood on the porch, cutting a ribbon strung across the front door. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for local news. As I looked out at the small crowd gathered on the lawn, I spotted a familiar face, Silas, standing at the back, watching me. After the ceremony, he approached cautiously. Congratulations, he said. It's beautiful, what you've created here. Thank you, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I read your articles in The Atlantic, he continued, about institutional reform. They're changing minds, changing policies. I nodded, acknowledging the compliment. My writing had found an audience beyond the memoir, giving voice to issues long ignored. Coraline, he said, his voice dropping. I know I have no right to ask, but I still... Don't, I interrupted gently. What happened between us was another life. We're different people now. And yet, I still feel it when I see you, he insisted. Don't you? I looked at him, truly looked at the man standing before me, not the memory of a New York night or the betrayal of an engagement. What I feel, I said carefully, is that I'm still becoming who I'm meant to be. And that journey doesn't include you, Silas.
Not now.
Maybe not ever. He accepted my words with a small nod. Then let him live with what he lost, he said, quoting something I'd written in one of my articles. As he walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the last lingering attachment to my old life, finally released. That night, I sat in my studio, surrounded by the guest book from the Romily house opening. Page after page was filled with messages from women who had attended, some survivors themselves, others allies in the work. One entry in particular caught my eye. My family tried to erase me too. Thank you for showing me I can write my own story. As summer turned to fall, I gave a rare interview on a late-night radio show. The host, a woman with a thoughtful manner, asked questions that went beyond the sensational aspects of my story. What would you say to others who feel invisible in their own lives? She asked as our time drew to a close. I leaned toward the microphone. I would say that invisibility can be a superpower if you use it right.
Watch.
Listen. Gather your truth. And when you're ready, when you're truly ready, step into the light on your own terms. The world will adjust its vision to see you. The day my memoir was published, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen before, a young woman holding a baby, both smiling in dappled sunlight. On the back, in faded ink, Romily and Coraline, spring picnic. The note accompanying it read simply, "You were always mine." I never discovered who sent it, perhaps an old family friend, or someone from the care facility who had kept it safe all these years. But I hung it in my studio window, where the light could touch it daily. A year to the day after the engagement party, I hosted a gathering of my own, a reclamation ball, at the first Romily house. The invitation specified that guests should wear what they had been told not to, be it clothes, makeup, or simply an expression of their authentic selves. The house filled with laughter and music, with stories shared in corners and dances that cared nothing for convention. I moved through the rooms in a simple green dress, the same shade I'd worn the night I met Silas in New York, but reclaimed now as my own choice, my own memory. As midnight approached, I slipped away to the top floor of the house. Not an attic, but a studio space flooded with moonlight. Through the window, I could see the city spread out below, lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. I thought of the Wexley house, of the tiny attic window where I'd once pressed my face, watching a world I couldn't reach. Now I stood in a different window, looking out at a world I was helping to reshape. They locked me away because they feared what I might become. They were right. I became free. What would you do if your family tried to erase you? Would you disappear? Or would you become their reckoning? If this story of survival and transformation spoke to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of strength found in the darkest places.